Morning class, I'm Will Kemp from Will Kemp Art School, and this week I've been down in Cornwall in the southwest coast of England, and I've been doing some sketching and painting in some of the really fantastic harbours and little fishing villages that there are there. It's so good for getting that nice view that's got houses and boats and water all in the same scene. So here's a view of the harbour in Padstow that I'm going to base an acrylic painting tutorial on. It includes all of these different elements, and this is the final view we're going to be working from today. You can find the reference image on my blog alongside a full material list so you can paint along with the exact colours that I use. So I've drawn out a rough sketch onto the canvas, and the canvas has just got white acrylic gesso on to start with. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a tonal colour over it just to take down the glare of the white and give us a nice undertone to work on top of. What I've put out here is some Naples yellow, which is a lovely warm yellow, which can be especially good when you're working towards turquoises and especially good for warm seascapes. If you haven't got any Naples yellow, you can make a mix with yellow ochre and white. We'll get very close to the Naples yellow. So I'm just going to paint it on quite loosely, quite like a watercolour wash really, just to cover over the glare of the white. So I've just got some plain water, and I'm going to put a few drops of an acrylic flow release. Just put that into the water, you don't need many drops. And what this will help to do is give more of a staining effect to the paint. And usually I just use the water, you don't really need it, but it's just if you're working with a canvas that repels the water slightly, then this can really help to disperse the surface tension and really get the actual paint to soak into the surface really easily. So I've got some paper towel on hand that if it goes on too watery I can just rub bits back. So I'm just using a 1/4 inch flat brush. This is from ProArt Proline, but any 1/4 inch flat that's a synthetic is good because it will hold its shape nicely. So even though the sky is going to be blue, having this yellow underneath it just helps to give, it helps to bring all the painting together. So I'm going to have a bit more on that side and a bit less onto this side. So these areas here on the building that I know are going to have more of this yellowy hue to them, I can afford to go on a little bit heavier on there, and again on this area of the greenery in the background. And you can start to notice, because this is reflected into the water, it's going to have all this yellowy tone underneath it here. So it's great to then paint it in onto this side as well. You'll see how it goes slightly greyer here, and that's just where it's mixing with the graphite of the pencil that I've put onto it. See how when I put water on it will smudge the pencil, but I'm not worried about that. It will just kind of add to the effect. It can be quite handy just for putting in those darks, so don't worry about that at all. Now usually I'd paint the whole thing in a one continuous tone. Because I know I've got this lovely white boat in the centre that I really want to kind of pop out, I'm just going to leave the white on that particular boat in the centre. I've toned in the other ones, but that one's just going to be left white. Again, I've got this nice yellowy undertone on this bottom left hand side. And just dampening the edge of the paper towel, a couple of bits here that I know are going to be pure white again on the building, I can just pull out. Okay, that's great. I'll just wait for that now to dry and I can start putting in the real dark darks in the painting. So now I've got some raw umber, I can still use the 1/2 inch flat brush and just start to put in the darks with the raw umber. I'll often usually use a burnt umber for the dark stages, but because this has got nice green and bluey hues, the raw umber is slightly cooler, so it can work well, especially when you're using blue hues and want that nice coolness into the shadows. Just make sure you keep odd little spaces that are gaps in these trees in the far distance. It will just help to give that illusion of the trees rather than it just being a solid block of tone. You see how I'm using the edge, the very edge of the flat tip of the brush, so that gives me a finer edge, and I can use that for drawing fine lines, and then I can use the rest of it for more of a block-like effect. So just dip it into water when I want to change the consistency so it goes a little bit thinner, and then just work in between those consistencies. When I see a more solid area here, I know I can go on nice and heavy with the paint, but when I'm closer down in this area, I don't have to go as dark. So because this boat's our focal point, it's nice to have it so you've got a tonal contrast around it. So it's dark on this top here, dark underneath it, dark around it. There's another boat behind it, but I might actually lose a bit of that boat just so it has more of a focus just on this one main boat. Here I'm keeping a looser and more watery flow to my paint application, and I'm just jumping my eye around the view and just looking for these patterns of dark. Even if they're not completely dark, just by adding that little bit of water to the mix, it gives me a dark to mid-tone. So I'm still just using the raw umber, but I'm getting a really nice feel for how there's this central circle of dark areas in the middle of the painting, and then all of the other tones can work against those. What can be so nice about using these flat edges, especially for doing buildings, is it's really easy to get a sharp edge as you get into drawing the building. It's having these odd sharp edges that really help to send the eye around and give that real illusion of a build-up of different buildings on the surface. So now I've got this darker edge here. See, I'm looking for this nice silhouette. It's very good for painting windows and little squares into your buildings without getting overly complicated and getting too detailed. Because often if you have a round brush and you go really detailed and try and make a really fine line, it can look very forced and it doesn't have that fluidity to it. So when you're using this square brush and you're kind of using it, trying to really get like one brush stroke and that will give you the square, it gives a more broken mark, more broken line to your paintwork, and it can just add more interest to the surface. Okay, that's looking good. Now I can add some white and start to still work with these two tones just to get a bit more refinement into the buildings. So now with the white, this is titanium white. I can just go over a few areas that I just want to make sure I've got that nice white hue too. Now I can work with the white and the raw umber and the Naples yellow to get this lovely shadow tone. It's nice grey. So the building at the end, as it goes a little bit yellower, just add a touch more of the Naples yellow. It's very close to the tone we've already got down, but it will just give it a bit more solidity to it. So I'm always cleaning my brush in water and then just dabbing it into the kitchen roll. And the kitchen roll just helps to absorb any water that's left on the brush so that I have a clean brush that is moist but isn't dripping wet with water. So that means that the paint will then flow really easily on it, and it'll also keep all the bristles together, which is really important if you're using a flat brush so that all the bristles are together so you get a nice sharp edge to the brush. And this is a good practice because when you're using that flat edge brush, you can try and draw with it to draw a straight line or a fine line just by using the edge of the brush, as well as using it for painting thicker parts in your painting. And it will really teach you a lot about brush handling and paint consistency when you just limit yourself to using one brush rather than always jumping between lots of different brushes in the early stages of your work. Now I can start to bring some blue to the painting, and all these tones, these muted tones we've got to start with, will sink back into the painting, and it will really bring that vibrancy and life to it. This is a phthalo blue with a green shade. It makes absolutely fantastic turquoise and is so good for seascapes. It's a really good colour to get that really lovely vivid turquoise into your paintings. Just some more raw umber there. So to start with, I'm just going to swap to a smaller round brush. This is a Rosemary & Co series 344. This is a size 4, but any small round will be fine. And what's nice when you've got the raw umber and the white, then you add a touch of this blue to it. It gives you this really lovely muted blue-grey hue, which is so good for, if you look at some of these colours in here on the top of the buildings, you can start to see all these areas that have got this lovely, slightly bluey, turquoisey grey to them. There's areas here as well on the side of the building. So it's a great colour to work with this palette. The Naples yellow, the raw umber and the phthalo blue green shade. They all work really nicely together. So having the finer brush enables you to draw in some very faint fine lines just on odd areas of the painting. This is where you don't really want to overdo it, but it can be so handy, just even having that little fine line there can really add to the sense that your painting is a lot more detailed than it actually is. So now I'm using a rounder brush. The tendency can be to have fine lines using the rounder brush, but them all to look exactly the same. What I'm still trying to do is vary the marks that I'm making just with this one brush. So I might have one line that's got a broken edge to it, another shadow shape that's slightly different than the one before. I might paint one line quickly, one line slower. So I'm always just trying to get these very subtle varieties so that you have those different marks, those interesting marks within the painting surface. So here where I'm working the flashes of light onto the darks, and then when I work on the front of the boat, I'm putting the darks onto the lights. So I've got these little areas that have got a very strong tonal contrast, a really strong light next to a really strong dark. And this can work in your paintings if you've got quite a large passage of a tone that's a mid-tone or a lighter tone, and then you put a very high contrasty area within that area. Even if it's very small, it will just help to add interest to that part of the painting. So I'm always scanning, looking for the tonal range within the painting. Then just by putting some of the Naples yellow into it, it's perfect for these reflections into the water, this nice subtle green. I'm just going to swap back to the squarer brush now. Just going to give an underlay of this. And what's nice about having it watery is it does exactly that. It flows down onto the page and gives this nice watery effect to the painting. And even if you just have odd parts of this left in the final piece, it will just help to give that lovely illusion of water. I'm now changing the consistency as I work wet into wet over this. It's more of a watery wash really, and I'm still sticking with the 1/2 inch brush for this, just for the simplicity of the tutorial. But you can experiment using a larger brush or a smaller brush just to practice having different sizes of brush strokes within the one painting. So here you can see, I really like this where you've got a watery undertone and then a solid colour. It's a nice complement and they work well together. For this tutorial I'm probably going to add more opaque paint on top, but it's a nice technique to experiment with, especially if you come from working with watercolours. You can have that nice watercolory feel and then thicker paint on top. It often works really nicely. I'm just swapping back again to the rounder brush just for a few more details in the water. So now for this stage of the painting, I'm back to just looking at the tones of the piece, the black and white tones, as if it was a drawing. And by this, it just means that I focus on the finer lines or the darks and the lights, and then see how they're all balancing within my painting. And I'm adding these tiny flecks or reflections into the water by using the fine edge of the round brush. And I'm keeping the brush onto the paint surface and just slightly twisting it so I get that variety of line. And now I can introduce a warmer blue, an ultramarine blue, to put in some of the sky so we can then judge all the colours together. So I've just put out some fresh colours. I've still got the original colours, but I've now added a cadmium yellow light, a permanent alizarin crimson and an ultramarine blue. Now I can start to bring in this warmer blue into the sky, and for this I'm going to be using a filbert brush. This is an Isabey Isocryl filbert and it's a size 6. It's a really nice brush, it's stiffer than the last brush we were using, so I can scrub it in a bit more when I'm painting in the sky. I've also cleaned my water, so I've got some fresh water and I can just dip the filbert into the water to start with and then just start scrubbing in the colours for the sky of the painting. It's quite light, the sky, so I'm just going to put a real watery kind of wash just with a tiny bit of the titanium white. And then when that's still wet, I'm just going to add a little bit of the alizarin crimson to it. I just want a stain of that really, so just with the paper towel I can take that back. So it just has this warmy glow on this side. And you'll also notice you can take a bit of that colour and just add a little wash on the top of these rooftops. A little glaze of that just helps to bring that warmth into the painting. So now with the ultramarine blue, I'm going to add a bit of the phthalo blue as well, just to it. I'm just mixing on the actual canvas. Then this lighter colour that we've got underneath, what I can then do is leave that there and just pull back, and it will give this really faint idea of an odd cloud in the sky. Again, just with a paper towel, it's really good for just smoothing out, if you want a smoother effect with your acrylics. I can add a bit of the cadmium yellow light, and this is going to give us a more intense turquoise. And now with the round brush I can start to add a few more of these intense colours. Some of the yellows I've got here on the buoys and a bit of the orange on this boat and some of the reds just around the painting. It'll just help to balance the rest of it all together. Also have some of that colour on this roof here. And then a very, very subtle glaze just over the green. It just helps give it a little bit of a glow in the background. So now I'm introducing these brighter colours. I'm scanning the image and just looking for these bright yellows and reds in the reference image. And because we've already established all of the cooler tones, we've got the blues in, we've got the greens in, now it's much easier to see the optical effect of the reds when we paint them onto the painting. They'll make the green appear greener and they'll really pop out more. So I've got this central band where the main focus is of the boats, and that's got all these nice variety of tones and brighter reds and yellows within that central band. Then once I've got the colours in, I jump back to kind of like a black and white mode of looking. So I'm then just looking at the black and white details and how it would work as a drawing. So in painting, it's always a kind of like a dance between looking at your scene in colour and then looking as if it was black and white. So the tones are working well together and the colours will balance nicely together. So just by using a straight edge just can help you if you haven't got a rigger brush, just to get those nice verticals on the boats. Then you can just have a look over your painting and see if there's any areas that could have a bit of thicker colour, a bit more solid colour. I mean, here I can see how I can go in a bit whiter on there on that building, just to give it a bit more punch. And on here I might clear that colour up a bit, make it a bit cleaner. So just have a look at your painting and see which areas you want to balance out or add a little bit more detail to. But remember, just keep the lines thin and then thick blocks of colour, and it will give the illusion of being a lot more detail painting than you've actually painted. So I really hope you've enjoyed this Seascape tutorial. This is Will Kemp from Will Kemp Art School.